Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, 92.9thegame.com. We are College Football Overtime. I'm Garrett Chapman. And, of course, the man to my right, or stage left, however, I don't know what way it's going to be. But, you know, he is Abe Gordon. Abe, how you doing? How was the week of football, man? Crazy week. Because before you answer, everyone told me that Saturday was supposed to be a snoozer. Everyone said it was going to be a snoozer. There wasn't a single ranked matchup and lots of lopsided spreads. But, Abe, we had anything but. We had some wild finishes. Just an incredible week of college football.
Yeah, I know the schedule's crazy next week, and we're certainly looking forward to that. But these are the weeks that always show up. You're right, no ranked matchups, and maybe you're channel surfing and trying to find game. These are always the ones that come back to bite you. And for the second week in a row, we have nonstop action. The noon games deliver. The 3:30 games delivered. Some games you didn't expect would deliver did. And certainly the night games. And then because of how things set up and because of the storylines and because of a 10:30 kickoff way out west, it delivered deep into the night. It was nonstop. It's always these days, and maybe not at the very top in terms of some of the results, but man, a lot of that through the middle of the conference action was outstanding this weekend.
It was fantastic. And we had a lot of interdivision or interconference play between Washington and Michigan State. You had Kansas State and Missouri end in just a wild finish, a 61-yard. I think that was an SEC record.
It was
I want to
SEC
say.
record. Yeah,
just an incredible finish in that one. I mean, just another great week of college football, and we're going to get through all of this. So we're going to recap all the biggest games of the week, like we do every single Monday morning, and then we're going to finish off with our Week 3 takeaways. And Abe, we got to start jumping into these college football playoff rankings here in just a little bit because we are, believe it or not, now 25% of the way through the college football season, which is just an incredible thing to say out loud. And honestly, this is just such a beautiful thing. I love this sport. We all love this sport. I know if you're watching this, you love this sport too. And it goes by fast. It goes by really, really fast. But let's get into the action from what we saw from Tennessee. Down in the swamp, the house of horrors for the Tennessee Volunteers. They have extended their winless streak in Gainesville to 20 years. It's been 20 years since 2003 have they gotten a win. It's just been such a lopsided rivalry in the favor of Florida. It looked to be changing. The winds looked to be changing for Tennessee and Josh Heupel. Then all of a sudden, the actual football happened. Abe, what did you see in this game? I know you're a big Florida guy, so I know you're probably feeling pretty good.
Yeah, so it's weird because during the show Saturday morning, I actually picked Tennessee, but I laid out two things that Florida needed to do if they were going to win this game with some caveats on top of that. I said, look, you have got to run the ball and take as much pressure off of Graham Mertz as possible. And I said, by the way, let's get the ball to Etienne. He's the best running back on the team, and for whatever reason, they just don't feature him the way you would see a team normally feature a guy that is the best running back. Doesn't mean he doesn't get touches, but it's kind of like the Detroit Lions. Like, why are we not using Jahmyr Gibbs? Like, let's use Etienne. They did on Saturday night, and it paid off in a big way. What was it, 172 rushing yards?
172 and a tutty.
A big one early on, which really helped set the tone, helped keep the crowd in it, did a lot of things for that Florida team. And then the other key on the other side of the ball was pressure Joe Milton. He makes mistakes under pressure. He did that on Saturday night as well. That was a huge key. And for a lot of people who questioned Billy Napier, questioned the Florida program, maybe look too deep into what we saw week one in that Utah loss. And I'm not saying what we saw Saturday is necessarily what this team's going to be all season, but certainly a little bit more of their capabilities. This is a team that can compete in the SEC, and Napier has got things moving in the right direction. In fact, moments after the win, they got a 4-star running back for the 2025 class. So we talk about 2024 all the time. They're starting to build 2025, and that is on the heels of what was in the swamp Saturday night. That is because of the atmosphere and the win and that sort of stuff. That if you lose that game, I don't think you're getting the 4-star running back that night, but that's how it went down. This was huge for Florida in a number of ways. And for Tennessee, for Josh Heupel, like you mentioned, that big step back into, all right, there's now 4 or 5 teams in the SEC East that are behind Georgia, and I have no idea who is ranking that group, but Tennessee's in that same group as Florida and South Carolina and Kentucky, maybe even Missouri. It's a mosh pit in there with Vanderbilt on the outside watching from behind. But, this is a bad performance from Tennessee. They have a lot of answers, a lot of questions they're going to need to answer the rest of the way.
Yeah, and Florida's right there in the thick of things. They looked terrible week 1.
Yeah,
I know lots of questions were swirling around Billy Napier, but this is a signature win for the Florida Gators under Billy Napier. I mean, week 1 they looked brutal. They had penalties. They looked sloppy. This game they dominated the trenches. And look, in college football, in the SEC in particular, if you dominate the trenches, you're likely going to win the football game. We've seen Georgia do that for the last couple of years, and that is what Florida was able to do in this contest. And I think that's one of the things that Billy Napier wants to bring in and establish that culture in year 2. I will say, though, Florida was able to run the football pretty effectively. They did a very good job. Like you mentioned, that was going to be a major key for them. But on the other side, Tennessee, make no mistake, everyone looks at the high-flying passing attack and they say, wow, this is a team that really wants to throw the ball. Not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would say. This is a team that wants to run the football. They like running the ball, and they like to do so effectively. They did not do an effective enough job at running the football in this game. They had just exactly 100 yards rushing in this game. In a road environment, that's just not going to get it done. It's not going to get it done. And look, the penalties were a concern. The rushing was a concern. They got pressure onto Joe Milton, and that's a concern. Like you mentioned, the guy isn't as effective when you get some pressure on him, like most quarterbacks are, but he seems to wilt a little bit if you can get into his face. And on the other side, Graham Mertz wasn't sexy, but he was efficient, and he got the job done. And if they get that out of Graham Mertz, I think Florida could win a couple football games. What say you?
Yeah, it's a little bit more than game manager because he does use his legs. Speaking of Mertz here, and I think that was an important aspect, certainly on certain drives, extending the plays or running for the yardage himself. I think that was an important aspect. I actually thought Tennessee needed to do a lot more of that with Milton, and you got these big athletic guys. When you have a Jalen Milroe, we'll get to what's going on down there in a little bit, but you got to use these guys for what their physical and athletic traits are. And I don't think Tennessee did that properly on Saturday night, and Florida took advantage of what they could. For Graham Mertz, no interceptions and making smart plays, extending drives. That's really all you're not asking Graham Mertz to be Anthony Richardson, okay? You're not asking Graham Mertz to go win you games. What you need is Graham Mertz get the ball in the hand of playmakers who can win you those games. And so I thought he did a very good job of that on Saturday night. He should be very proud. Billy Napier should be really proud. This was a good win from a team that, at least from the fan perspective, again, myself included, did not expect coming in. I thought you could see probably midway through the first quarter that they were going to be up for it, and they certainly were. Yeah,
and like I said when we opened, this is a house of horrors. The Swamp is a terrible place for the Tennessee Volunteers, and it's going to continue to be that way. They haven't won back-to-back games against Florida since 2003.
Yeah,
and Josh Heupel, I mean, you got to figure this out. If you want to be a consistent, a top dog in the SEC East, you have to win these kinds of games. And look, it just didn't get it done. The 0 for 3 on fourth down, just everything was against them, the penalties, everything else, and they just looked kind of bad in this game. Speaking of not looking good, though, the University of Georgia in the first half, brutal. Things got a little dicey for the Dogs early in this game. Spencer Rattler was cooking in the first half. He was, 16 of 18, 152 yards and a touchdown in the first half. But then the lights switched, and all of a sudden, Georgia remembered that it's the back-to-back national champions. 6 of 24 passing, 104 yards for Spencer Rattler in the second half. He got beat up by the Georgia defense once they figured out, hey, we're a pretty good team, and we can get this done. Carson Beck, he's okay, but the offense in and of itself has been a little uninspiring. What have you seen from them so far?
Yeah, look, it's another slow start, and they missed a field goal early on as well, which kind of even shined a brighter light on the lack of points in the first half. But it's the slow start, as you mentioned, on the other side of the ball that concerns me. you weren't worried the past 2 years about when Stetson Bennett would get cooking or when that run game would work because the defense was dominating at such a high level. You really only needed, you felt in recent years, you felt you were good at 17 points. The game was over. Based on what I saw, that may not be the case. And look, UGA did dominate in the second half. And so the question is, did you figure something out in the second half? At what point are we going to see that second half effort show up in the first half to the tune of 21 points with none allowed?
What point is it going to burn them if it doesn't?
That's the other aspect of it. It is either one of two things is going to happen. If they continue these slow starts in the first half, it's going to bite them. No doubt about that. At some point in the season, it will bite them. Or on the flip side, they get rid of the slow starts. They look like the team we saw in the second half starts to show up earlier and earlier in games, starts to show up in the first half. And maybe we get back to a little bit of the domination that we saw last year and the year before. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to stick with this mantra for as long as I need to, all they've got to take care of is winning games. There were a lot of teams who were ranked pretty close to Georgia that did not look very good in the first half either. Florida State was struggling. Michigan was struggling. Alabama was struggling. Texas was struggling. Let's not sit here and pretend everyone else is looking great early on and Georgia's limping around trailing by double digits. There were a lot of issues across the country on Saturday for these so-called power teams, 20-point favorites and all this and that. To do it against an SEC opponent, to turn it on, whatever they found, to be able to find that against a guy like Spencer Rattler, who's been so good and was good in the first half, it still does impress you a little bit. You just want to see it as a complete effort. That's going to be the key for Georgia because what they did in the second half was incredibly impressive. And if they can look like that for an entire game, they look like national champions. But based on the whole effort, what we saw, a lot of questions still, not just on offense, not just on Carson Beck, but on defense as well.
Yeah. And look, you face your biggest halftime deficit in 3 years. It wasn't since Jacksonville in 2020 when they played the Florida Gators that they had a deficit this big. And then they come back and score 21 unanswered points. You had boos coming down when they were going into the locker room. That's something that I was not expecting whatsoever, boos. But look, they figured it out in the second half. And like you mentioned, and I know we're going to get into our takeaways later, but there were a lot of teams across college football that struggled a little bit. And we're still early in the season, and this Georgia team is still coming back from injuries. We did see Deion Edwards play in this game, 118 yards on 20 carries for him. Big explosiveness that they had really been lacking in their first 2 weeks of the season. I think his health is going to be very, very beneficial for this offense just in general. But outside of him, Javon Bullard also missed this game. Ladd McConkey just missed his third consecutive game. This is a team, look, they've won 20 games in a row. They're the best team in the country. And until proven otherwise, they're the defending national champions for a reason. Back-to-back national champions. But you're not immune from the injury bug, and you got to get healthy. And if this team doesn't get healthy, then they might have some more issues. But look, they're still really good, and they still dominate their opponent. But let's transition because I want to talk about probably the most exciting game of the college football season so far. Colorado State and Colorado, the Rocky Mountain Showdown. Deion Sanders, Jay Norvell got into it a little bit earlier in the week. Something about sunglasses and wearing hats and drama, and I don't know why you bring that up on the eve of this game. But look, Colorado State came to play, and they had Colorado on the ropes late in this game. But if it wasn't for some heroics from Shedeur Sanders, he was just incredible in this game. Absolutely unreal. And now how about Shiloh Sanders? He also had a pick six in this game. Big day for the Sanders crew. But they get the win in double overtime, 43-35. Abe, what did you see in this one? What's your takeaway?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a big wake-up call for Colorado. And they were going to get this wake-up call over the next 2 weeks. I think it came a week early. That it's not going to be as easy as it felt the first 2 weeks. You've got so much more tape on what you're trying to do now. I thought their defense was exposed. You can talk about the pick six. You talk about Travis Hunter, who's now going to miss a couple of weeks due to injury on a dirty hit. they were exposed on what they can do on the back end there. And look, one of the concerns that you sometimes have, and I'm not going to say this is a Deion thing. This is overall. When you get guys from the NFL who did it at the top level, the Hall of Famers, when stuff came easy to them at the highest level, it's very tough to coach because sometimes they didn't have to do things that lesser talented players have to do. There's a real issue in the secondary, and we'll see if Deion Sanders, who obviously we can't talk about what he doesn't know about the secondary, but he's got to make sure that he's addressing that the right way with the back end there, because the crossing patterns, they're going to just see more and more and more of those until they show that they can stop that. And this is a Colorado State team that is not anywhere near on par with the quality teams that they're going to come up against. And so, look, they got their third win of the season. That's an incredible achievement standalone based on what they were last year, what Deion did in the offseason. This was and look, who knows how it plays out against Oregon, but for this team, when you look at their schedule and you're like, well, look, they're 3-0. I don't see any reason they're not going to be 7-8 wins deep. I think they're going to run into a lot of opposition that can handle what they're doing. The other thing that was exposed beyond just the secondary, the line play is going to be a real problem the next couple of weeks. And they're not good enough in the run game. They do an okay job in pass protection, but they're not good enough in the run game. They don't create enough pressure on front with the defensive line. And while they were able to skate by barely with some heroics, as you mentioned, on Saturday and double overtime, I don't think that's going to work the remainder of the season. And they've got a lot of figuring stuff out to do. Again, you don't want to take away from what they've been able to do in the story that it has been. But, man, it almost came to a crashing halt. Probably should have come to a crashing halt, if we're being honest. Colorado State should have been able to put this game away, and they didn't. So kudos for showing that resilience that Deion talked about in his post-game interview. But it is a win that almost feels like a loss based on, one, you talking all – I mean, yes, Jay Norvell talked some trash, but Deion talked trash after that. Deion didn't back that up. I'm sorry, he didn't. You can't come here and play a team that you're favored by 20 points against, Garrett. Talk about they made it personal. Now we're going to make it personal too. Make it an ugly game. Do this, do that. And then limp your way, barely get there to double overtime. If you're going to talk it, which I have no problem with him saying it, back it up. I mean, you know how many people ended up betting on Colorado because Deion said they made it personal. It was going to be a nice, clean game, but they made it personal. And people are like, oh, man, they're going to run up the score. Here's my money. Let's pound it. Let's get that. Nah, that wasn't it. He did not back up the talk. And that to me, was as frustrating as the result itself in terms of Colorado moving to 3-0.
Yeah. I have three big notes. If you had told me before this game that Colorado State was going to have 17 penalties for 182 yards, I would have told you that they would have run out of the building. But then on the flip side, if you had told me that Colorado was going to have 70 yards rushing, that's it. Yeah, I would have been like, "Oh, actually, we might have a football game here," and that's really what it was. I mean, it was a great game. It was exciting, but Colorado is in for a bit of a rude awakening when they actually get into Pac-12 play, because the Pac-12 is a very good conference this year. And like you mentioned, you said that the lines of scrimmage that they boast are just not very good. And Oregon, they are one of the better lines in at least in the Pac-12. You know, they're not an SEC line necessarily, and we saw that when Oregon played Georgia last year, but it's still pretty darn good. And I think when Colorado makes that trip over there, they're going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening next week. And then after that, they have Caleb Williams and the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and the USC Trojans. Those are two very difficult games, and you're already starting to see some of the attrition from having to play three good opponents really in your first 3 weeks. There was no time off. I mean, you have TCU week 1, then you have Nebraska week 2, and then Colorado, of course, a huge rivalry game in week 3. And then you have all of this fanfare and drama, and everything is all hyped up. And I don't know. A part of me is a little concerned that the star has shined too brightly. And sometimes what happens with young players is they burn out. And I'm a little concerned that they're going to burn out a little bit. And now they're running into one of their toughest stretches of the season. And I am a little concerned that they're going to roll into Oregon and get punched in the mouth and not know how to respond. I mean, we'll see. And of course, this is me diagnosing and predicting rather than reacting to what we've seen on the football field. But look, I think Oregon's a better football team. This is going to be the first time that Colorado's not the better and more talented team. Then we'll see how they react in this one.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about that star fading. It really happened in the first half of that Nebraska game where it just wasn't working for them. And yes, they eventually got control of things, but what
helps when you have the quarterback you're playing has 6 turnovers.
The moment felt like it was lost by then. Coming off TCU, nothing was riding higher than Colorado. There's no doubt about it. And the struggles, for me at least, the struggles in that Nebraska first half was like, okay, well, this is probably a little closer to what they are. Now, they got the win there. Great job. Thought it was a really quality win considering. They got the win Saturday night, double overtime, Colorado State. Good job considering. But, yeah, it's about to get a lot more bumpy for them. And again, because of the dirty play of Colorado State, you're going to have to do that without Travis Hunter, which is just a terrible loss, obviously, for the team, but for those of us who enjoy watching him play, I think this term gets tossed around too much in sports, but I would say in college football right now, he is the unicorn, at least of the moment. And so tough not to see him get to shine against Oregon and USC over the next 2 weeks. Certainly hope that he is it's a short-term setback for him injury-wise and get him back on the field because win or lose, whatever. That guy's an NFL talent, and I like seeing him play.
He's just fun. He's a fun player, and it's a fun team, and that's Deion Sanders. I mean, that's the effect that he has, and it's going to be a fun team, and I'm not rooting against them. I'm not really rooting for them. I'm just cheering for good football, and as long as we have exciting storylines and everything like that, we're going to continue to talk about Colorado and Deion Sanders. But look, I just pulled up their schedule. Next week, you're at Oregon. Then you have USC coming to town. Then it's at Arizona State, Stanford, number 22, UCLA, number 14, Oregon State, Arizona, number 21, Washington State, and then number 11, Utah to finish off the season.
Yeah, I mean, look.
It's a brutal schedule.
They've got, I was counting in my head as you were going, they've got 3 games that they probably have a shot to win in Arizona State, Stanford, and Arizona. You don't win one of those games, you're not bowl eligible. And that's not to say that 5 wins would be a disappointment, but you're already at 3. And I think they're better than Stanford based on what we saw them get into this weekend. I tried to watch the Arizona State game. That was embarrassing. So at that point, it's kind of left up to Arizona, and we'll see if Jaden Rashad is injured or healthy or what's going on there. But, I mean, they're not beating – look, maybe I get a huge surprise, but they're not beating UCLA or Utah or USC or Oregon State. I forget, Oregon. They're not winning those games. And so there's look again, three wins is great, but there's no margin for error if you're resetting your expectations and goals for this Colorado team to becoming bowl eligible. There's no margin for error at this point.
And I think one of the things that we've seen in college football, just after people, it's a revisionist history. After people watch a little bit of football, now they're like, oh wow, Colorado is going to be X, Y, and Z. And this goes for a lot of different teams. Your expectations change as the season goes along, and people need to remember where Colorado was last year and how big of a hole that they've been trying to climb out of over the last couple of years. Just in general, for the last couple of decades.
You also just can't go a whole season on the adrenaline and energy that Deion has built in these first 3 weeks. That's not going to sustain itself 13 times.
College football, or just football in general, is a sport where you have to stay as even-keeled as possible. And I'm a little concerned that Deion Sanders is a little bit too much like this. It's a roller coaster. And we saw some of the valleys and the highs last week. Talking about valleys and highs, just the valleys.
There's no high there.
Alabama quarterback room is just abysmal right now, Abe. 17-3 is your final. They traveled to Tampa, a soggy, kind of wet South Florida team in Tampa, Florida, and a soggy Alabama team came out to play. Jalen Milroe was benched, and he didn't get a single snap in this game, which I was very surprised, especially with how they were running the ball in this game or trying to. Tyler Buchner gets the start for Alabama. The Notre Dame transfer, he was sloppy, 5 of 14, 34 yards. Then he got pulled. Then we saw Ty Simpson. He was a bit underwhelming, 5 of 9, 73 yards, did have the rushing touchdown. But in a day where you're running the ball, I figured we would have been seeing a little bit more of Jalen Milroe. But this quarterback situation looks far from figured out. And I think that we have a serious issue in Tuscaloosa right now. What say you?
Yeah, this was a mistake. This was a panic move. This is my opinion, but this was a panic move that Tommy Rees begged Nick Saban to let happen. And I think one attempt of it has shown it to be a big mistake. They never should have gone away from Jalen Milroe.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tyler Buchner is a quarterback who can just kind of throw the ball a little bit. Ty Simpson is a quarterback who can just kind of throw the ball a little bit. Jalen Milroe is a quarterback who can just kind of throw the ball a little bit. Now, if all three of these quarterbacks, and none of them are Bryce Young, and none of them are even Mac Jones, and they can all just kind of throw the ball a little bit, give me the one who can run. I mean, at the end of the day, give me the one who can run. It's probably your best chance. I don't think we're getting any growth from Simpson or Buchner that you weren't going to get from Jalen Milroe. And look, that doesn't mean Jalen Milroe is the answer. The problem is they don't have an answer at the quarterback position right now. And that's fine. But if none of these guys are the answer, give me the one who can run a little bit and let's move forward on that. I mean, this was an embarrassing effort. And it was surprising. It was certainly surprising to hear the news that they were going away from Milroe. Just based on what happened last week. I think this was a Tommy Rees plea, the new offensive coordinator there. Obviously, Buchner comes down from Notre Dame after Rees does, transfers in, probably feels like he's a little more comfortable with his grasp of that offense, and some of the throws are what they're asking him to do. But then you put him on the field, and that doesn't happen. And now Saban is ticked off. He makes you go the other route. That didn't work any better. And again, if it's my opinion, now you have to go back to Milroe after not playing him a game and say, we screwed up. We made him. I mean, I don't know what you do, but you got three quarterbacks, none of them that can throw. Give me the one that can run and actually use his legs this time. I said multiple times, I didn't think they used his legs right against Texas. You got to use the weapons. You can't be scared about him getting hurt or whatever. You got to use the weapons that you have. Alabama's in real trouble, and they got a big game coming up this week. I know we'll talk about it on College Football Game Time on Saturday, 8 a.m., but they don't have another game to figure it out. This was the game for them to figure out the quarterback situation, and all it did was maybe reset you even further. We don't know what the plan is now. This was a really bad look. They've fallen out of the top 10 for the first time in however many years, and not very confident that they're the squad to beat in the SEC West. They may not even be the second best team or even the third best team in the SEC West. It is a really tricky position for Alabama to not have a quarterback right now.
We could see Dylan Lonergan in this game, this one coming up next week. That's just
put McClellan at quarterback and run a Wildcat.
Just do something. All they want to do is run the ball anyway. But it's really interesting that in a day that we see Alabama hold their opponent on the road to only 3 points, that all we can do is talk about the quarterback situation, because it is a serious, there's recipe for disaster right now in Tuscaloosa. They don't have an SEC loss, and I think that's important to remember. But that loss could be coming next week.
Yeah,
when Jackson Dart and company come rolling into town, and I know we're going to get into them here in just a minute. But look, you're going to have some serious problems if you're not able to score the football. If you can't score, you're going to have issues. And I understand that you want to run the ball and you want to establish your offense that way, and that's the goal this season. But you can't tell me that and then do what you did on Saturday against a lackluster opponent. USF is not a good opponent. Okay.
I think they were really surprised by the fact that they weren't able to throw. I think they made the switch this game because they felt they could have success passing against USF. And the fact that they didn't, I think really caught Tommy Rees, Nick Saban, and whoever's in the quarterback room. I think it really caught them by surprise. Mm-hmm. They wanted to use this game as that build up for next week, and it just didn't happen. You're absolutely right. The fact that you couldn't do it and use this game as a prep week for next week is a real issue.
It's especially concerning, like I said, with Ole Miss coming to town next week. Then you go head on down to Mississippi State. Then it's Texas A&M, who we've seen have success on offense with Connor Wegman and Bobby Petrino. Then it's Arkansas and Tennessee. And look, the schedule's just heating up. And I have more questions about Alabama right now than I did before last week. And I have serious concerns. And look, Nick Saban is the GOAT. He's the GOAT. But are we coming to a situation where we could be seeing the end of the dynasty of Alabama? Or is that just premature?
If you're asking me personally, I think it's premature because you've missed on one quarterback, and I don't think that ruins your run towards the top. If you miss on another quarterback, though, I think you find yourself in a situation, and look, we asked the same question about Clemson. I think Clemson missed on, and they've got other issues with Dabo and what's going on there, but DJU wasn't the guy. Cade Klubnik's not the guy. Now you're 2 years down the road with no quarterback, and you've got to hit on that next one. I think as Alabama's in this discussion too, where they've just got to hit on their next quarterback, or you do start to really have those talks. I don't think we're there yet, though. Certainly not with Nick Saban.
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of those conversations are a little bit premature, and I think those are the people who are trying to dance on the graves of Alabama a little too early. So if you're going to dance on the grave of Alabama, dance lightly. But we'll see what happens when Ole Miss comes to town. That's a candidate for our college football game time game of the week.
There's a lot of candidates.
We've
got
a
lot of choices.
We got a lot of choices.
I'm going to veto you on that, by the way. I already know.
No, it's going to be Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Exactly
That's what
right.
I'm thinking it's going to be.
Let me say you this also in regards to this Alabama game, because I know we're not really going to talk about Texas a ton. But it was interesting to see that we built Texas up a week ago on the backs of what they did to Alabama. Mm-hmm. And then 1 week later, Alabama really struggles against South Florida. We have questions about how good Alabama is. Texas struggles against Wyoming. They got going in the fourth quarter, but they were entering that fourth quarter 10-10. Mm-hmm. And because I have questions about how good Alabama is, I think it's only fair to now also relate that to a question about how good Texas is. And in a moment against the Wyoming team, I thought they could prove that they could back up their ranking, back up the talk. They didn't do that. You know who else didn't do that? Florida State. Another conference game there against Boston College. They don't get it. I know Jordan Travis kind of got banged around early on and whatever, but we immediately thrust these teams after big wins into they're the team that's going to represent their conference in the national or in the playoffs, right? FSU is going to go to Clemson in 2 weeks and roll right through it. And Alabama's going to do it. And Texas, who's going to compete with Texas in the Big 12? They're going to roll. They don't look great. And Alabama didn't look good. And you play that factor of Team A and Team B resulted in C. And if Alabama doesn't look good, was that win from Texas as impressive as we thought it was just a week ago? I'm not so sure that it was. And then that gets backed up by the fact that they don't look good against Wyoming. So I think you asked right at the start, like we're trying to figure out who's good. This week, it didn't answer any questions for me at the top. Not with FSU, not with Texas. Man. Yeah, I just don't know anymore.
No, and look, and it's still going to be an impressive win for Steve Sarkisian in Texas, what they did in Alabama, going on the road.
If we're going to give credit, and I know it's not Wyoming, but we're going to give credit to Georgia for an absolutely dominant second half in which they outscored South Carolina 21-0. I think to some extent you do have to give credit to Texas. It took them a little bit longer. It was fourth quarter only, but they did get control of that game and cruise to a relatively comfortable victory. Maybe I'm a little harsh on them, but it was a little shocking. It was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alabama hasn't looked good. Florida State looked pretty brutal at times in this game. They looked actually thoroughly outclassed at times. They were outgained 457 to 340. Boston College had 18 penalties in this game. 18 penalties. But look, they were down 31-10, and then all of a sudden, wake up. and they started taking advantage of some fumbles, and they had one that they returned for a touchdown. It was 31-10, and then all of a sudden it's 31-29, and Boston College is about to kick the door in on Florida State's season. Look, I think was this a situation where they were just looking ahead to Clemson next week?
It's partially that. I think in general, it's a team that hasn't been here in a while. And it's a team that has to learn how to put teams away, has to learn how to win. And yes, as you referenced, has to learn how to avoid the distraction of upcoming games. I think you're accurate on that. But, this is a team, I thought this was a good lesson for them. And Georgia has learned this over the course of the past couple seasons. But remember, Georgia didn't just wake up and start winning national championships. They were failures at the highest level on the road to getting there, including a loss to Florida in a game they probably shouldn't have lost. For me, this is a step for Florida State that didn't ultimately cost them, but it's a reminder of you've got to remain focused on the task, and you've got to stay driven both week to week and in game, because it doesn't take much for another team to get you. And for them, that's how this felt to me is they took for granted that they had cruised out to a big lead. And once you turn it off in game, you don't turn it back on. It's very difficult to ramp back up. I thought that was a lesson hard learned by Florida State, and ultimately in a game that did not cost them. I think that's a good lesson for them.
Yeah, and look, this is still a really, really good football team.
And by the way, same for Texas too. That's another team that hasn't been winning big games in the realm of what we saw a week ago against Alabama. And I think what happened against Wyoming and the slow start, it's part of the learning process of how you become a champion.
Yeah, and this is on part of it, I mean, it goes for the head coach. It goes for the players.
Yeah,
it goes for the fan bases. Literally, everybody's learning how to win.
Yeah.
And Florida State, I think you said it very well. They have to learn how to put teams away, because it looked very much like they were all right. Like they started slow, and Boston College had the lead early in this game, and then FSU just zips away, and then all right, 31-10. All right, let's go. Let's move on to next week. Let's get our plane tickets ready and in order for Death Valley. And you saw that. You saw them kind of turn it off.
You zone out.
And totally they learned a good lesson. This is a really good lesson, because it's a lot easier to learn these lessons when you're still going into Death Valley next week undefeated, still unscathed. And no, not all wins are created equal, especially in college football, but losses still hurt you a lot, and it's a lot easier to learn a lesson after a win than it is a loss. You retain it a little bit better if it's a loss, but look, they came out unscathed, and look, at the end of the day, Jordan Travis is healthy. That was a little concerning. I got the update on my phone because I wasn't watching the game at first because I saw the score line.
Florida State, Boston College. I don't blame you.
Florida State, Boston College. But I got the update on my phone that Jordan Travis was being tended to on the field. And I said, that's how seasons are derailed. But he comes back and he plays the second half, and he looks altogether pretty good. But look, this is a game that they should not have been in the situation. They turned it off, but they learned their lesson. And I think that we're looking ahead to next week, and I think next week's going to be a big matchup for them. It's a big test for them. Their second big test of the season. It's coming to town with Clemson. Say what?
Might be their last big test. We'll see.
It might honestly be their last big test. But I still think that Florida State is the team to beat in the ACC, and they've shown it so far through 3 weeks. And next week is going to be a lot of fun. Speaking of critical matchups, man, that's another one that we're going to have to discuss next week. We're going to have so much fun. And, of course, we're going to be with you from 8 a.m. until 12 o'clock on Saturday. I believe we're still till 12, but we'll be with you at College Football Game Time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. But I do want to keep it into a local sort of thought here. Ole Miss and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was right there in this game. They were right there. And I think that Brent Keen Company, this is a group that I think they're showing signs of progress. They're showing growth in the first year of Brent Keen.
Absolutely.
I understand that they're 1-2. I understand that they had the fourth quarter debacle in this one against Ole Miss, but they were only trailing by 7 points in the fourth quarter. So don't forget that, and don't let the final score fool you. But they also had the game against Louisville where they fall apart in the second half. But we've seen strong first halves. We've seen little sights of things that Georgia Tech could be as they continue to grow and establish that culture. And one person I'm looking at in particular is Eric Singleton. He's a true freshman, and he is a true talent. 97 yards and a touchdown in this one. One off the arm of Haynes King, who again delivers a fantastic performance. 300 yards for him again. But it's Jackson Dart who steals the show. Rushes for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also completed 10 of 18 for 251 yards and a touchdown. And this was especially important in a day where Trey Harris wasn't playing. You're talking about a guy who set I believe it was an SEC record. I'm sure it was an Ole Miss record with 4 touchdowns in a single game. He's banged up. He's their leading receiver. Quinton Judkins, of course, is dealing with a midsection injury, and he was a little banged up. They kind of had him on a pitch count, and that's going to be especially important thing to monitor as we move into Alabama week for Ole Miss. But Ole Miss on offense, they cooked. They were cooking. 48 points total for Lane Kiffin and company. Big game for them. Abe, what did you see in this one?
Yeah, it was odd. It very similar to the game against Tulane, where you're looking at a relatively pedestrian scoreline for Ole Miss, and then all of a sudden it's like 3 touchdowns in 6 minutes at the end of the game. You're like, holy crap, they almost hit 50. But with under 8 minutes in the fourth quarter, they only had 24 points. So obviously you'd like to see them turn whatever they're doing at the end of the games. You'd like to see them turn it on earlier. Jackson Dart, if there were any further questions about the Spencer Sanders and the transfer, I mean, Jackson Dart just continue to prove why they're sticking with him and the athleticism, what he can do with the leg. He was very impressive, but I'm actually with you. What I took out of this game was much more impressive from the Georgia Tech aspect of things. Look, they were there at the start of the game, and they weren't able to get it done, turn the ball over on downs. I thought they had a bad fake punt. I thought Brent Key did panic a little bit, and because there was so much time and the way the game played out the rest of the way, they would have been tied based on if you play it out and whatever. But I thought this was a good showing for Georgia Tech. Now, you still have to pick up the loss, and you're going to have to deal with that. We're not here for moral victories, but I was very impressed with what I saw out of Tech, and good things are headed towards that program. There's no doubt about it. This is a team that's going to continue to grow and continue to impress. And look, just like we talked about with Florida State and Texas and learning how to win, that may not come this year. But I think in this first year, they're taking steps forward. There's no doubt about this. This was a competitive game, all right? I'm very impressed with what Ole Miss is, and I think I'll talk more about that on Saturday morning. But this was a competitive game, which tells you where Tech is. To go on the road to a team like Ole Miss, who's, what were they? They're going to be top 15, right? They were ranked 17th. I don't know.
17, yeah.
So they didn't jump, but they feel like a top 15 team to me. And so for Tech to be hanging around in this game for as long as they did, very impressive. It actually could have been even closer had they converted, played a little bit more cleaner. This was a good step forward, even a loss for Georgia Tech. There's no doubt about that. I really anxiously await them getting into the ACC play to see how they stack up against some of the teams that we're going to see them against the next couple of weeks. This was a good showing for them.
Yeah, and we're not going to have to wait very long because they have Wake Forest next week. And I think that's going to be an extremely important game for them as they're looking to continue to grow under first-year head coach Brent Key. And look, I think that this is a bowl team. It's a team that's going to be going bowling by the end of the season. And I think if you want to have that, you have to win your games against Bowling Green. You have Wake Forest. Those are your next 2 matchups. And then Boston College, that's a winnable football game. Virginia, that's another one. And then they've historically given North Carolina problems. I mean, I see enough games on this schedule that they should get to 6 or 7 wins. I'm still pretty confident, especially if the offense is going to continue to cook at this level. But at the end of the day, it's like, I understand you're playing a high-flying offense in Ole Miss, but you can't give up 550 yards of offense. That's just unacceptable. I have too many expectations for Thacker and this defense at Georgia Tech, but they've gone from pretty good at times to just anemic at others. and they've had issues with tackling and other things like that. And those sorts of things, you don't just figure out how to tackle. That's a problem, and it's a systemic issue that you need to figure out. And hopefully it just comes from the players. And look, they're going to continue to grow and become a better program, and I think they're on the right track to do that. But, Abe Gordon, I want to get into our week three takeaways. And I'm going to start here because this thing is wide open. Wide open. When I look at college football the last couple of years, you've seen pretty consistently who the best teams are going to be. Georgia's been widely the best team for the last 2 years. Before that, you have Alabama, and then before that, it was LSU was so widely better, and then before that, it was Clemson and Alabama and everybody else. It's pretty clear who the best teams were going to be, and of course, you have your Ohio States and your Michigans and everybody else. But this year, we're looking at a season where, like I said earlier, we're 25% of the way through the college football season. Oklahoma and Texas are both off the hot starts. Notre Dame and Ohio State, they're playing next week. They're on a collision course for this weekend, and that's going to be an exciting game, of course. And I've already made the decision. That's our college football game time game of the week coming up this weekend when we discuss it on Saturday at college football game time. They're on a collision course right now, and I think the winner of that game is going to really have a front seat towards the college football playoff. But also up there, you have Michigan and Penn State, two teams who I think are very good and could, in any other year, be in the college football playoff discussion, and they're going to be right there as the season continues to unfold. Don't forget Rutgers, who's off to a 3-0 start. They've only allowed 30 points total this season, so I don't think that they're going to be a contender, and so I don't want to necessarily have them up in that same breath, but I do want to give them that shout-out. The Scarlet Knights, 3-0, and they're looking pretty good. But you go out west, you have the Pac-12, which is causing all kinds of chaos, and I know we have differing opinions necessarily on the Pac-12 about whether or not they can get somebody into the dance.
Yeah.
But look, it's a wild place, and a lot of wild things can happen. And then you come down to the SEC. Ooh, I don't know if anybody wants to win it outside of maybe Georgia, who is sleepwalking again.
Yeah.
Florida has a loss. Tennessee has a loss. South Carolina has 2 losses. Alabama has a loss. Texas A&M, LSU. Are we looking at a season where Ole Miss could be representing the SEC in the title game? I don't know. I don't think so necessarily. I still think it's Alabama, but they've got a loss here already. So I don't know who's going to win the SEC. It's wide open, and there are a lot of seats at the table right now. But it's a game of musical chairs that we will dwindle down to just 4, and that's going to be just such an exciting season.
Yeah. If the teams that you and I penciling in already, if they don't make their runs to the playoff and get in there, and for me, those teams, just thinking off the top of my head, you're looking at Texas, Florida State, Georgia, and Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State over. I mean, if those teams aren't making the runs that we expect them to make, you're looking at the first time in college football playoff history that a 2-loss is getting in. And that's what you're looking at. There's going to be a 2-loss team getting in there, and that's where my thoughts on the Pac-12 start to slide back in because, I feel like they're just going to beat up on each other enough to where they're all going to take a pair of losses. But this might be the first year that a 2-loss gets in. It is wide open. And the teams that we've penciled in, I mean, again, Texas, Florida State, Georgia, and the winner of the Big Ten, if that doesn't play itself out, if Florida State goes to Clemson, let's say, and doesn't handle business, I mean, you're looking at a 2-loss team getting in somewhere. So that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. The biggest takeaway for me, and maybe it's just like recency bias, we're now 3 weeks in to the college football season, and I have no Heisman frontrunner. I've got no one. I mean, guys are putting up numbers, and I've mentioned it before. You're going to have to be throwing 350, 400, 450 yards a week like Michael Penix is doing, or 3, 4, 5 touchdowns a week like Sam Hartman is doing. And look, I know there's certain games that guys will take that step to become the Heisman frontrunner, but the fact that we don't have one now is really interesting to me. I could be wrong. I don't remember there being a season where there wasn't a clear guy, and maybe that guy fell off or didn't. But last year, for instance, Hendon Hooker came around pretty quickly, and it felt like he was the guy until he got hurt. He was the guy. I mean, not week one. It was, for whatever reason, Anthony Richardson was the Heisman winner after week one a year ago with the win over Utah. But felt like Hendon Hooker stepped to the front of that class pretty quickly a year ago. And you had the other guys who were floating around. But even returning Heisman, Caleb Williams he's not separated from the group. I mean, Sam Hartman, Quinn Ewers, Michael Penix, but no one has separated themselves. I find that very, very interesting. Again, maybe it's recency bias, but I don't feel like in recent years I've been at a point where we're 25% of the way through this thing, and I don't really have anyone that's taken any steps to disassociate themselves from the field.
Well, Abe, we're getting into the conference schedule this week. We're starting to really see those games start heating up. I just pulled up the schedule. And I'm going to read this to you here in just a second. I'm really excited about it.
It's the best week we've had in a number of years, in my opinion.
This is going to be one of the most exciting weeks. And look, I think this is where we're going to start seeing the wheat separate from the chaff. And this is really what's going to happen with these upcoming weeks. And I'm just looking at it. Like, look, you've got Michigan and Rutgers. I just talked about Rutgers is 3-0 right now. Florida State travels to Clemson. You've got Ohio State and Notre Dame, Penn State and Iowa, which is going to be just a sneaky, very good game. 7:30 on CBS, that one. Oregon and Colorado, we talked about those two. Utah and UCLA, LSU and Arkansas, Bama and Ole Miss, Oregon State and Washington State.
Yeah.
Whew. Get ready to roll, man. It's going to be fun.
It's not a make or break week necessarily. Well, I mean, it is, but
every week's make or break. That's why we love college football.
To me, this is a front runner schedule. And what I mean when I say that is you find out who the front runners are in a number of conferences through all of these various games. Look, there's 3 different games involving the top 3 teams in the Big Ten. And look, they may all 3 win, but I think based on what we see, I'll know who my front runner is. If Ohio State wins, if Michigan wins, if Penn State wins, based on how they look and all that stuff, I'll know who my front runner is in the Big Ten. All right,
and I think all 3 of these teams face unique challenges in this upcoming week, and we're going to learn a lot about these guys. So
you go to the ACC though, Florida State, Clemson. I'll know who my front runner is. You mentioned a multitude of different SEC West battles. Now, not in the SEC East, but in the SEC West. After this week, I'll know who my front runner is, and the same thing out west in the Pac-12. I know you didn't mention USC in that group, but you mentioned Oregon, Colorado, you mentioned Washington, UCLA.
USC's got Arizona State. That's still going to be a good game.
But I probably won't learn a ton there. But my point is there's a lot of games where I know what my front runner is. And then finally, in tying into that to the Big Ten, I'll know if Notre Dame's important to pay attention to or not. Because if they lose this game, I don't know if they can get in without a lot of help. If they win this game.
No, they have to win this game.
Yeah. So this is like a front runner schedule for me where I will learn a lot about who's real contender this week.
Absolutely. And look, you got to tune into the Audacy app on 92.9 The Game this coming Saturday. College football game time is going to be taking care of you. Abe Gordon, Garrett, Chapman, and of course our buddy John Fricky. The 3 of us are going to be taking you all the way up till kick at 12 o'clock. But we are college football overtime, and that's it for week 3. So make sure you're back here again on Monday because these are going to be dropping every single Monday morning, and we're going to be giving you those water cooler talking points that you want to have when you go to the office. You might as well wake up with us every single Monday morning as we recap everything that happened in the world of college football. For Abe Gordon and for myself, Garrett Chapman, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, we are college football overtime. We'll see you again next week.